Sir, shall we start?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, respected Professor R.B. Sharma, Associate Professor, University of Lucknow, and my colleagues in the department, and the dear participants from different parts of the country, a very warm good afternoon to all of you. Hope I'm audible to all of you.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is indeed a very pleasant afternoon, and we have here with us Professor Sharma. And I first met him when I was there in Lucknow for my refresher, and I was really impressed by the way of his, delivery of lectures. And he is a theorist, I can tell. He is a stalwart in theories. And apart from all those things, he's a very down-to-earth person, and he is an eminent scholar too. And more than my words, his way of delivery or his lecture will tell you a lot more about him during this 1 hour we are going to have. Without taking much of his time, I hand over this session to Professor Sharma. Sir, on behalf of the Department of English and Foreign Languages of Bharatiyar University and our friends and my colleagues, I heartily welcome you to handle this session, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, David, very much. Good afternoon to all the participants and the department members. At the outset, I convey my regards and thanks to the organizing secretary, Dr. P. Nagaraj, HOD, Department of English, and to the whole organizing team. Special thanks to Dr. David for giving me technical assistance and making me sure that everything is going to be fine. I'm hopeful that no technical glitches come in this lecture. Today I'm going to talk about the idea of postmodernist literary text, challenges and possibilities for research. This topic actually always gives me a lot of encouragement, and always it obsesses my thinking, because the text, literary text, is something that we are all concerned with, we are dealing with in our daily life, in our teaching and research activities. And over the period of time, in my experience of teaching literary theory and literature, I realized that literary text is perhaps the most complex and a very rich text in comparison to other kinds of texts. So it demands a special kind of attention, more theoretical concepts to understand, to unravel what this literary text phenomenon is. Because it is the literary text is so rich, and because it is so complex, it is clear that no one idea or no one concept is going to explain this completely. We need multiple concepts, ideas to understand the concept of literary text, the concept of the text in literature. With this idea, I thought that I would be using my teaching experience of literary theory to, in a very simple way, not very complex, not using all kinds of theoretical jargon, but trying to make you understand that what kind of literary text that we are dealing with in these times, in the present times. Before we can start to talk about what I understand of a literary text in these times, I think it's very important for us to understand what do we do with a literary text in our everyday life, as teachers, as researchers, as publishers. So what I'm going to do is that first I'm going to say a few things about the kind of the things that we do in our teaching and research activities with the literary text. David, can we have the slide, please? Okay, next. Okay, so if you look at the teaching of literature in India and abroad, I think we are still dealing with literature with two approaches, which are functioning simultaneously. One approach with literature and theory, literary criticism, is the essentialist approach. We are all teachers of literature, we all know what do we do with a poem or a drama or say a prose text. When we go to teach in the classroom, the way we convey the meanings, the universal messages, the humanistic ideas that the literary text contains, that gives us an impression that that essentialist approach, or the approach that we can say which gives us aesthetic pleasure, that approach is still very much prevalent in the classroom. I'm sure that we all teach literature with this approach, and this is going to continue. It is not that after coming of theories, this is going to stop. And this should continue, because literature, after all, is written and enjoyed for aesthetic pleasure. So there's nothing wrong if we take the essentialist approach in the classroom. There are, like all great canonical writers prescribed in our all the syllabi that we have in India, Chaucer, Shakespeare, Dryden, Pope, Wordsworth, Eliot, and all the literature that we teach. I think this is something that we still do. We go and teach the students that how humanistic they are, how universal their messages are, and how much they contribute in our understanding of the humanity. Now, this teaching of literature is this essentialist approach, aesthetic approach, is further strengthened by our teaching of literary criticism. So when we teach literary criticism, many of the critics that we have in our syllabus, like Plato, Aristotle, Longinus, they all contribute to that idea, that essentialist idea, or the aesthetic approach. Like if you teach Aristotle, we all teach that. So the understanding that we get from the teaching of Aristotle's Poetics is that literature or drama conveys the truths or reality of life, which is higher, which is greater than the truth or reality that we see in our everyday life, or that we come across in other kinds of texts. Similarly, Longinus talks about the theory of sublimity. That means that how the literature that has the sublime nature is greater than other kinds of literature. This Greek tradition is also followed by the English critics like Dryden, Pope, in one way or the other. I'm not saying that they are exactly matching them. Sidney, or when we come to the romantic critics like Wordsworth, though he talks about the language of the common man, but his idea of literature remains that literature is a higher kind of communication than other communicative disciplines. Uh, Coleridge also mystifies literature in his own way, and he, in fact, in some of the cases, he disagrees. Uh, Arnold, as we all know, his idea of literature was certainly of the kind that it is literature gives us access to the truths of life than other kinds of texts. Um, when we come to new critics and Russian formalists, I think in one way or the other, the essentialist idea of literature continues even with them. The Russian formalists, they claim that only the medium is literary. Only the medium demands attention of the critic. Language is literary, that is what they say. The new critics also continue with a slight difference. They focus on the form, but they also pay attention to the content of literature. The Kleinbrook's idea that literature is organic whole, or literature or a literary text cannot be paraphrased. What he says, heresy of paraphrase. That idea is basically based on this assumption that literature gives that aesthetic pleasure in the way as it is. It is constructed, made, created in a way that its organic nature cannot be disturbed. Otherwise, it won't be giving the same kind of effective aesthetic pleasure that it is supposed to be. The point that I'm making is that the literary criticism and the teaching of literature in the classroom both strengthen the idea that literary text has the essentialist nature. It is capable of giving aesthetic pleasure, and that assumption is very much functional in the classroom. It is actually at the basis of our teaching and learning literature. Because I think if this is removed, it would be very difficult to continue with the discipline of teaching literature. But then there's another thing that also happens. David, next slide. Okay. What is the something that goes on simultaneously along with the dominant idea of literature or literary text? What goes in our teaching classes, in our syllabi, in our research, in our publishing books, papers, and that is something that is related with the critical theory. And critical theory dominates the teaching of literary criticism in almost all the universities. Whatever we may say that it is a post-theory time, but theory is there very much in the classroom. It is taught in the classes, and the teachers who teach literary theory have a different kind of feeling about that. They know about literature more than probably others know. Of course, I don't subscribe to this idea, because I consider that every approach has its own its own strength. As I said in the beginning, that there is no one approach that can define a literary text, and all the approaches are necessary because it is a complex thing. It's a very rich phenomenon. Let's look at some of the things that we teach in the literary theory paper. We all know that we have, you know, I'm sure that there's hardly any uh, uh, paper, critical theory paper, in which we do not have Derrida. We all struggle teaching Derrida, science, structure, and play. But in most of the university, this paper is this essay is prescribed, and we teach it. Now, when we teach other deconstructionists also, like Paul the Man and others, what else do we have? We have post-colonial critics like Edward Said, Bhava, Spivak. We have French feminists like Helen Sissou, Luce Rigre, Julia Kristeva. We have gender theorists like Judith Butler. We have newer historicists like Stephen Greenblatt, Hayden White, Michel Foucault. We have post-structuralists like Roland Barthes, and many other theories and theorists. My point is slightly different, that on the one hand, we have an approach of teaching literary text which is essentialist in nature, which actually justifies what our connection with literature, our dealing with literature, our teaching of literature. On the other hand, we also have deessentialization of the text in the classroom. We also, and when we write papers, research papers in these times, or when we do research, I'm quite sure that there is, we don't have any research in that traditional sense that we have been doing. I'm sure nobody does the research like Wordsworth as a nature poet, all this. Nothing of that sort is going on. All all the researchers, they make use of literary theories. All the papers, research papers which are published, they are making use of some theoretical model or some theoretical point of view, and which are basically drawn from these critical theory papers or critical theorists or critical theories. So now the point is that on the one hand we have that essentialist approach, on the other hand we have this anti-essentialist critical theory. So if we have the idea that critical theory is not there, I think it is probably a misnomer. Critical theory is very much there if we want to remain professionals of reading literature. Hello, there was some disturbance. Okay, so David, is it all right?
Yes, sir, it's sorted out. No issues.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay, am I audible?
Very much, sir. Very much.
Okay, fine. So the point that I was making, that if you have all these theories and theorists, then how can we say that we are living in post-theory times? Whatever we might be doing, even if we are looking at literature from a traditional point of view, the theories of the present times, the kind of the vocabulary that we use, the kind of the structures that we use, the kind of the language that we are using in our research papers and in our books, that all uses the theories and theoretical models. So the literary text becomes very complex. Yes, complex but rich. And as I said in the beginning, it demands not one theory or one idea, that how can we say that this is what a literary text is. It has many things at one time. It is simultaneously multiple things. So we need some kind of a structure by which we can understand various things together. There's no need to say that the various things are working separately. Everything might contribute to the understanding of even the other thing, even though they might be completely opposite to each other. To simplify this, I have used three concepts by taking the various models into account. These concepts are related to the three simple words, the language, and that is one first thing that I'm going to discuss. The second is the self, or the subject, the one who writes literature and the one who reads. And the third thing that I'm going to discuss is the meaning of literature, the product of literature. So the three things: language, self, and meaning. Within the framework of these three concepts, I'm going to try to bring various things together to understand that from different points of views, from different frameworks, we can approach a literary text without getting the idea that it is confusing or it is opposite to each other. David, next slide. Hello, yeah. So the nature of literary text, a framework. The idea of language, I'm going to give you some understanding how it has changed over the time and what it has become even now. So initially, I was talking about the aesthetic approach. Initially, the idea of language was with Aristotle, with Dryden, with new critics, with all of them, that it is a creative medium. Literature, the language that is used in literature is a creative language. It is aesthetically pleasurable. It is organized in such a way that it affords aesthetic pleasure. Now that idea of language is still there, even if deconstruction has come. But that does not mean that deconstruction is a different thing. If somebody is researching a literary text from the point of view of deconstruction, it's all right if you are not talking about the creative aspect of language. But that does not mean that that they are opposite to each other and then one has to be renounced to be on the side of deconstruction. So I believe that that idea, when you are going to teach literature in the UG and PG classes, that that the language of literature is creative and it is aesthetically satisfying, pleasurable, that idea of language still works, and the new critics are still very much relevant. The Russian formalists are relevant, but the only thing is that they might be relevant, they might be functioning in a certain way. So when you are taking that approach, take that approach. There's nothing to say that, okay, that this is now irrelevant. Who says that it is irrelevant? The theorists who take the extreme positions, very extreme positions, justify their own theory, nothing else. So one, that we can still work with that traditional idea of language, that it is a medium which it's a the language of literature is a special kind of language which creates this phenomenon that is literary text in that sense. The next idea of language that that I say Derridian idea of language. It is basically, it actually, Derrida was a philosopher. He was basically trying to uh, uh, understand the nature of knowledge, not just literature, but the whole episteme, the whole knowledge system. He was talking about the Western knowledge systems. So he was trying to say that, that whatever knowledge systems that we believe in is to be true, that truth of the knowledge system is illusionary, because all the knowledge is created in language. And language, he was taking the idea from Saussure, that the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary, and that's why you cannot believe in the truth that is created by language. So basically, it was anti-essentialist idea of language that was later on appropriated by the literary critics. Paul Liman, of course, was working simultaneously with the same idea. It is an anti-aesthetic idea, anti-essentialist idea. Derrida was putting his stake on signifier. He says only signifier is something there, which is signified is only an illusion that is attached with the signifier. When you take this idea to literature, so what happens is there is a very unique use of this idea. What is the use? That we start questioning the canon of literature. How much relevant it is, how much good it is to the teaching of literature. It is actually very good. Many of the people, they consider the Derridian approach or deconstructionist approach as harmful to the teaching of literature. In fact, it is good in a way that we can't even conceive of. Why? I'm saying this because if it is by using this theory, we are challenging the canon of literature. So once you challenge the canon of literature, the other literary texts that includes the literary texts of the natives in the post-colonial theory. Post-colonialists used the theory of Derrida, but they don't like Derrida or Paul Liman. The text of the natives, the text of the female writers, the text of the Dalit writers, they get equal status with the canonical literature, because it is only by using the Derridian theory that you can challenge the so-called universal essentialist message of the canonical literature. This is probably the people have used Derrida, and then they have created problems with the Derridian idea. But this contribution of Derrida, that he was anti-canonical and the non-canonical texts have got equal status, this contribution of Derrida cannot be overemphasized. The next kind of language that we talk about is the psychoanalyst idea of language. What is that idea? Freudian idea of language. Freudian idea of language. I'm going to talk about Freud, Lacan, by using this framework. Freud considered language on the part of consciousness. So language was hiding the content of the unconscious. But simultaneously, if a psychoanalyst uses the language carefully and manipulates it, he might get access to the unconscious by using the language. So Freudian idea of language is that it is hiding and revealing simultaneously. Isn't it a great idea that makes the reading of literature so interesting, so charming, that when you look at the literary text, so we consider that because the writer was working on the conscious level, there might be another layer of the meaning that might be functioning at the unconscious level. So we analyze language to understand the second layer, third layer, fourth layer, or many layers of the unconscious that go in the making of a literary text. So again, it is such a rich idea that one can go on interpreting the 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 meanings of literature to the extent that one can bring out unknown, unthinkable sides of the hidden meanings. Next, uh, Jacques Lacan's idea of language uh, is very interesting because he considered he basically calls uh, language as the formative tool of the self. And his idea of language is the narrative, the symbolic language. And uh, he amplified the idea of language to include all the narratives, anything that can be considered as narrative, whether it is literary narrative, knowledge narrative, a self narrative, the human being as a self, which functions, or any action, or any gesture, or any image. Everything is a narrative that becomes a language that needs the interpretation. Now, how rich this idea is that because you know what? Now, the idea of the text has gone beyond the written words. Now, everything that gives meaning is a text. We all understand now. We know. We analyze. We research the images. We consider them as text, and we analyze them as text because they are narratives. They create a certain kind of meanings. So there are film narratives. There are cultural narratives. There are museums, there is architecture, anything, a gesture or an action, anything that gives meaning is a text that needs interpretation. Any symbolic thing or any symbolic medium that is capable of giving meaning is a text, and that needs the intervention of a critic. And who can be a better uh, uh, critic than the literary critic? You know, literary critic is at a very advantageous position because a literary critic understands the society, the the human being, the language, the functioning of the language in a very rich way that is not available to others because we have the tools of understanding language uh, from different points of views. So even the film criticism, which is basically a film narrative, though there are images, but they can be better interpreted by a literary critic because he can transform or he can transform that film into language. Though there is a conjunction of image and language in the film, but that can be transformed as a narrative and it can be interpreted. So Lacan's idea of language is very wide, very exhaustive, very complex, and beyond this, he also includes the three different zones in which he divides the self. He divides the three phases of human subjectivity into real, uh, imaginary, and symbolic. And Lacan considers that language is not just symbolic, it also partakes, it shares, that is in the imaginary. You know how complex it is, that the something that is in the imaginary, language is part, even shares that also. So language is not just the symbolic system that we encounter. Language is part of the image. Then Lacan talks about the real. Real in Lacan is that stage where the language cannot intrude, where the language does not have access. That stage of the human being's life between 0 to 6 months. Now that is a dark island for Lacan, but he, in the later stage of his seminars, he considers that the symbolic can even go to the real also, and that is a very powerful language when when somebody is trying to make sense of the unknown experiences of life through the language, available stock of language. Now what happens, I think that is the avant-garde literature, that is the most powerful literature written, because when a writer is trying to understand or go to the dark uh, island of human experience, that that is I think the creativity of the extreme kind. So that also can be accessed by the by the same language, critical language, but only thing that we have to enlarge the idea of language. Now, there's another concept of language that is functioning in the present times, that is neo-Marxist idea of language. This idea of language is that language is the carrier of ideologies, that every narrative, every cultural event, or every cultural narrative has the ideological aspect to it, that there's no narrative, no culture, or no institution which does not have ideology or functioning of one or the other kind. So Althusser's essay that, ideological state apparatuses, that very clearly brings out that how all the narratives, they are used by the users of language to slip in, or to garb in one or the other form the ideologies that one believes in. So because of this, you see, if you understand that narratives are the carriers of ideologies, then all the literary texts, they start unfolding to you. For example, if you take the feminist approach, how do the feminists take the text? They believe that the literature written by the male does not cater to the female subjectivity or female experience, because the language used by the male is actually infused with the male ideology. The post-colonial theory also uses this idea that the language of the Western writers, in one way or the other, hides the Western ideologies about their culture, about their beliefs, about their knowledge systems. The same thing goes with the Dalit theory, that the kind of the language that we find in the canonical text, that uh, that language does not give voice to the Dalit experience, because basically that language is written by the dominant uh, ideological forces, and that is what makes them canonical. So once we start looking at the language as a carrier of ideologies, then another kind of meaning starts emanating from the text. So this idea makes the literary text a different, makes us to read the text in a different way. These days, we also hear a lot about post-truth idea of language. That is, language is used to create own kinds of truths, own kinds of messages. So there's no truth, only manufacturing of truth goes on with the language. So even then, we can use this idea of post-truth, idea of language, to understand that the truths that we use are only linguistic in nature. So in a very short way, in a very synoptic way, I try to make you understand that how the concept of language has evolved over the time to how it has been used by different theorists to create different theories of their own kind, and how it can be used by us to interpret the literary text. Next, okay. So the next concept that we are using is the concept of self or subject. Now, this I'm using for the simple reason that if you understand the agency from where the text is created, the genesis, the source, then it becomes easy to understand the nature of the text. And if you understand the self or the nature of the self and subject, then it also becomes easy for us to understand the nature of the meaning that is generated by the reader. So my approach is to take both the author and the reader as consciousness. I'm sorry it was muted, but hello. David, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I was talking about the idea of self or subject. Again, the one idea that has been dominantly functioning is that the humanistic approach, the modernist approach, that a human self is creative, rational, reasonable, stable, and that is what makes it capable of creating the literature which gives aesthetic pleasure. Now, this idea that we have been using, I'm not going to deal much with this, but I'm going to move on to the post-structuralist idea of self, the Derridian and Paul de Man's idea, which considers a human self, a linguistic self. The moment they say that it is linguistic self, that makes them again go back to the same idea that it is empty, vacuous, and all that it is capable of doing is creating illusionary an illusion of meaning. So that idea is also fine because if you look at the feminist literary criticism, that or the post-colonialist literary criticism, that basically works uh, uh, with this, that um, that the self which has the dominant ideological advantage, that self creates literature and it puts the other self at disadvantageous position. Now, uh, I find in all these social theories a kind of paradox, because on the one hand they consider the uh, the uh, the male self as non-essentialist, and then they uh, and consider the female as the essentialist self. It's a methodological paradox which I think the social theorists have to do. The same thing happens in the post-colonial theory. There's a new Marxist idea of self. That idea of the self is very interesting, because when you uh, take this idea of self, then the reading of literature or literary text becomes different. What is this idea? Althusser, in his essay, Ideology and State Apparatuses, explains that how the human consciousness comes into existence. And he says that there are RSAs, repressive state apparatus, and ISA, ideological state apparatuses. Both have the ideological underpinning. And it is these systems, these ideological systems, that create the consciousness of the human subject. He uses the concept of subject. Now, this subject, when he creates the literary text, so it is natural that all the ideological imbibings that have gone into his consciousness, his or her consciousness, in one or the other way, they go in the making of the literary text. And then the literary text cannot be considered as pure, innocent language. One has to critically read it to understand what kind of ideology is creating this text. And this kind of understanding of self is interesting, because it's very rewarding also, because by taking this idea, all the theories like postcolonial theory, Dalit theory, Marxist theory, all this, they can reread literature to give another kind of meaning of the literary text. Psychoanalytic concept of subjectivity, as we all know, Freud divided the human self into three: ego and the superego. Lacan's idea of real, I explained earlier, imaginary, and his idea of symbolic self. Christiva, very interestingly, she talks about the semiotic self, and that's very interesting. Symbolic and semiotic concept. The concept of semiotic basically says that it's not just symbolic which creates the consciousness of the human being. It is also something that is pre-Oedipal. Before somebody becomes symbolic, that is what also goes in the making of the consciousness of the human being. So that idea makes us understand that what kind of things might be there in the text. Not just the symbolic or ideology, or the dominant ideology, or the rationalistic self. but there can be something beyond what we can know. Even the semiotic space can influence the self. The post-human idea is a recent one that we have been, talking about, which is Donna Harvey's. She talks about that cyborg manifesto, that human being in the present times cannot be understood only in terms of the human qualities, but also in terms of what is going on around in machines and the animals, etc. David, next slide. Okay, so but if you understand the nature of language and the nature of human self, the various kinds of things that we say about the self and language, then it becomes so easy to understand the product of the two. The consciousness that creates the narrative, literary narrative, and the kind of the meaning that is created. So the first thing that I already explained to you, that essentialist message, that is one. Contingent and fluid, that is another, the Derridian idea, and ideologically influenced, the neo-Marxist idea, psychologically layered, Freudian, Lacanian, and Christovian idea. So all these ideas, all these kinds of meanings are simultaneously there. It is just up to us to take a particular approach and then explain, discover, analyze the text, the literary text. It is not that one is against the other. It is just that what kind of the approach that we are taking. It is perfectly fine if somebody is reading the aesthetically pleasurable way of approaching the text. But it is also perfectly fine if we take the psychological idea to the text, or the ideological idea to the text. So all these meanings are existing in the text simultaneously. So what I have done is I have tried to understand the nature of the literary text in a way that goes that can work for all kinds of the text. David, next slide. What I am doing is the complex nature of the literary text. As researchers, we are confronted with the literary text as against the ordinary communicative text. So literature is not ordinary communicative text. It is different. It is figurative. It is symbolic. It is sharing with the real. It is sharing with the imaginative. It is something we can read, the gesture, the action, everything is a text for us. So the richness that a literary text carries with it is really something that has to be deciphered by a literary theorist, literary critic. Its language is extraordinarily creative, metaphoric, aesthetically organized to recreate the literary experience for the reader. The experience of literature is imagined, but it also shares the material reality. And then it becomes something very different. It becomes very different, very rich, very unusual. So to understand this experience, we can't rely on the common tools. We can't rely on one tool. We need to have various tools. We have to go beyond the limits. We have to even search those tools which may not be right now there. Like, these days, there is a lot of research in cognitive sciences. There's a new area that is emerging that we call cognitive poetics, which is wonderful. That is trying to understand a literary text from a very different way. A text is written discourse. Any text that we understand is a discourse in the sense that in a discourse there are more than one participants. It is never one way. There are many. It's a kind of communication, and it wants to do something with it. Like there is a motive behind writing a particular literary text. So this has to be kept in mind that a literary text does something, and there are more participants than just than just the literary writer. A text is a written language. It's a structured, symbolic, arbitrary social system. A literary text is not functioning in isolation. It is very much there in the society. It has to be interpreted in relation to the social systems. It's created by a consciousness called the author. Roland Barthes calls the author the scripter, because the consciousness is created by the social, the cultural system, the symbolic system. So when we look at the author, author is not a simple figure. It is a consciousness created at a certain time by the social, cultural, and historical narratives, by the material conditions, at the same time by the imaginative understanding of the life also. And the content of the meaning has to be retrieved and created by the reader. The reader is the created. He has to recreate the context. Now, what happens with the literary text is that the context of the literature is always has to be recreated because it is not there. Every reader has to recreate every time the literature is read. A text as a cultural object travels through the historical times. It is always in the becoming, not being. You know, a text is not static. Literary text, it is always becoming different. Today, the way we understand one text, tomorrow it might become something else because the newer tools will emerge, new context might emerge, a new understanding of the reader might emerge, a new understanding of the consciousness might emerge, and then the literary text becomes different. So it's a complex, it's rich, and we need various ways of looking at a literary text. Thank you very much, David. There was a positive time, so I had to wrap up as soon as possible. Thank you, all the participants. Any questions? All questions welcome.
Thank you, sir. Participant, do you have any questions? You ask a question through chat box or unmute your mic, then ask the question. Dear participants, do you have any questions? You can ask a question through chat box or unmute your mic, then ask the question. Sir, there is a question has given here. Nice enlightening lecture. Some post theories can be given.
Okay, very interesting. In fact, personally, I'm not convinced with the idea of post theory. There are some of the people, they believe that we are into post theory era, but as I said in the beginning, that the kind of the teaching of literary theories that we do in the classroom and the kind of the researches that we are doing, the kind of the research papers that we are publishing, the kind of the research books that we are publishing, all of these in a very practical and factual sense, they suggest that theory is very much there in our research, in our teaching. And it is very paradoxical that on the one hand, we talk about the post theory, and on the other, we teach theories and we use all the theories in our research. So the post theory, though they claim that it is like we can go back to the earlier idea of literature that can make the literary teaching and learning different. I doubt that whether this can ever happen, because these theories have enriched the teaching and learning of literature, and they have enriched and they have basically changed the face of literature forever. That's what I understand. Maybe if something more happens, we should be welcoming that if that happens ever.
Sir, one more question, sir.
Yes.
How culture can be literary text and how can we interpret it?
Okay. Culture, that we say, all human actions, activities, or habits, they are cultural practices. That includes the writing of literature or writing or creating other knowledge systems. Now, recently there has been a spurt of cultural criticism. In cultural criticism, we use very interestingly all the tools that the theory has given. Like we look at we read beyond the face of the text. Like if there is a particular culture, so we take that as a text, and then we say that we decode first that as a text, and then we believe that this text has more than the manifest meaning. Outwardly, it might be meaning something, but we receive that, we try to analyze this, that is there more than what it looks on the surface. So when we read culture, cultural activities, cultural narratives beyond the surface, all these theories come handy. Like we can read culture from the psychoanalytic point of view. We can read culture from the theories of ideology, like Althusser can be used, that how much ideology go in the making of culture. For example, the dressing of a particular gender in the gender studies. So the like what Butler talks about, Judith Butler's theory of performativity. She says that the female culture, female gender, or other genders, they are created by the cultural and social performances. That includes language performances also. So to understand that what performance go in the making of a gender, we have to critically read the social and cultural practices that make the identity of a gender. For example, like a female identity is created by the kind of the cultural performances that she practices in everyday life, the kind of the dresses that she puts on, the kind of the uh, uh, household work that she does, all, or the way she greets, the kind of the gestures that she has, all these things constitute or make the identity of a female. Now, this cultural activity, this cultural performance can be critically read to say that if the female is not performing these identitarian acts, I call performances as identitarian acts, something that gives the identity. So if the female is not performing particular kind of identitarian acts, then probably she will not be identified as the kind of the female that we understand her to be. I have given this example with regard to the female identity, but the same goes with the LGBT identity, the same goes with the native identity, the same goes with the Black identity, the same can be considered with the Dalit identity, because there are performances which are attached to the identity. So if you have to use literary theory to bear, to expose that what makes a human being a Dalit. A Dalit is not something that somebody is born. There are social cultural practices in which the one indulges, and that makes him Dalit. That makes him a female. That makes him a queer identity. So all this can be very much exposed by using various critical theories, the theories of ideology, the theories of psychoanalysis, the theories of language. All this can be used. I hope I have answered this question, and with the examples it has been clarified. David?
Vinod sir,
Sir,
is there any other question? No?
sir, there is no question, sir. We'll
Okay.
still wait for some
There
more.
is one last question, sir. One last question.
Yes,
Can you
Please tell how to understand the intertextuality in poetry or in a poem.
Great. This question I was expecting and wondering why this has not yet come. See, intertextuality is a very vast concept, in the sense that when a particular narrative is created, whether it is poetry or fiction, poetry and fiction and drama and prose, the differences of genre. Otherwise, it is a narrative. So, so that poetry is written by a poet. Now you see the theory of the self. The poet who is a consciousness. The poet is not somebody who is just like that. There's a mind. There's a whole of the being of the poet that creates the poetry. Now the consciousness that creates the poetry is how the consciousness is created. There are various factors that go in the making of the consciousness. There are narratives, there are cultural narratives, there are social narratives which are contemporary. There are ideological narratives that go in the making of the poet's consciousness. So when the poet is writing, all of that is getting, or some of it is getting transferred on the poem that he is writing. Now, there is also a historical sense. When I say historical sense is created not just by history, but everything that has gone, all the culture, all the social narratives that go in the making of the historical sense. Even that historical sense is very much part of the makes go in the making of the poem. So various kinds of influences, when they come together and they motivate the poet to write a particular kind of poem, that is what go in the making of the intertextuality. Now, what happens further when we draw the meaning? The reader is also not innocent. The reader's consciousness is also constituted similarly. So when we try to understand a poem, it is not just the meaning that the poet has written. It is also the meaning that is created by the interface between the reader, whose consciousness is also created, and the text. So the text has to be interpreted by the reader, by the consciousness, and then the kind of meaning that emerges becomes very different than what perhaps the author ever thought, or than what the poet ever thought about. So intertextuality, when we start trying to understand, and like it is very enormous. It is a very rich area. It's like mine that you can keep on mining, but it never comes to an end because so much goes on in the making of who we are and who the poet is. The poet is not a simple figure, or the writer is not a simple figure. The writer is created by so many forces: historical, ideological, contemporary culture, society, and then his own being as a human being. What Lacan says, real, unknown, dark zone of everybody's life and experiences. Hope it's a very difficult question, but I tried to answer. Hope it makes some, it gives some answer to what you want.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sir, shall we give the vote of thanks, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, good evening to all. It's my great privilege and honor to give a vote of thanks to Dr. R.P. Sharma, Professor, Department of English, University of Lucknow, for enlightening this session. And I hope, dear participants, you people got more information regarding the research trend through his lecture. And sir, your session is really enlightening us. And I hope we people got more information through your lecture. Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving this wonderful lecture. On behalf of our English department and on behalf of our organizing committee, I thank you, one and all, to the participants and the resource person, Dr. R.P. Sharma. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you
sir.
very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. It was a great pleasure talking to you all. Hope to see you all again sometimes, somewhere. Life, if we get a chance, we'll meet again.
Sure, sir. We'll meet, sir.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.